We did just hear from the president himself about what he says the stimulus package has achieved. There's been plenty of criticism, though, about how it could have been better focused. And last night I spoke with Columbia University professor and Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz about this. I asked him if he thinks the stimulus did work.
Yes. If you mean by has it worked, is unemployment lower than it otherwise would have been? Is output higher than it otherwise would have been? Answer unambiguously yes. If you ask, was it enough to get unemployment rate down to anywhere normal, the answer is no. 9.7% unemployment should be viewed as unacceptable. And the more telling statistic that more than 1 out of 5 Americans who would like a full-time job can't get one, surely, signifies a labor market that's not working the way it's supposed to.
Does that mean that there's need for another stimulus?
One of the problems with the previous one was not only was it too small, that it wasn't well designed. A third of it went to tax cuts. And the problem was that with Americans having this burden of debt, uncertainty, they didn't spend a large fraction of that tax cut. They might feel better, but it didn't translate into spending, and if it doesn't translate into spending, you don't get any stimulus.
But you could look at that and say, there aren't incentives enough for companies to create jobs.
What I say is, let's have linkages between any tax benefit and job creation, and that's why one of the proposals of the president is a job tax credit. So if you create new jobs, additional jobs, then you can get a tax credit. That kind of proposal, to me, makes a lot of sense.
Market devotees would look at that and say, unless you find the need as a corporation to create that position, that the incentive, purely on a tax basis, to open up a new job isn't the same thing. It's not as efficient as if you needed to bring someone on to meet demand for your product, per se. So does the incentive to hire by being given by a government to a corporation actually achieve what the goal is here?
I wish we didn't have 10% unemployment. The fact is that the market has failed. And it failed in the lead up to the crisis. Capital was not allocated well. We had a bubble. The bubble broke. Now we're left to clean up the mess. And unfortunately, the government has to help clean up that mess. And part of helping clean up the mess is temporarily, not permanently, but temporarily providing additional incentives to induce people to hire more workers than they otherwise would.
How do you do that in a way that works? Do you set as well wage limits, wage expectations for those incentives for the jobs that the government is helping to create? I mean, if you were designing this.
Yeah, if you increase the number of employees relative to what you've had in the past, we'll give you for each new employee a certain amount. So that gives you a real incentive to hire. The government bears some of the cost of hiring to basically absorb some of the uncertainty, because let's face it, there's a lot of uncertainty going forward about where the economy is going.
What's the real unemployment rate from your point of view? Is 9.7 an accurate read, or is there further fatigue that's not
No.
in?
That's why I say the real number is much closer to 20%, because it includes the workers who've become discouraged. We have large numbers of people who've gone on to disability. Disability pays better than unemployment. So if you can get a doctor to say you have a headache, a migraine, or a backache, you get higher pay than if you go unemployed.
We want to bring you comments from Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, because I spoke with him yesterday about the latest news out of Greece, Spain, and the rest of the fiscally troubled nations. He told me that what needs to be done so the markets could take heart with some of the proposals being made so far to stem the crisis. Listen in.
What I think should happen is that Europe, the EU, should realize what's going on and realize that if there were a demonstration of real support, Greece would have no trouble making its interest payments. Even
what do you mean by support? They've said, sort of collectively, we stand as one here.
What they should be saying is, we will provide mechanisms to maintain the ability of Greece to roll over its debt if necessary. This is not a question of solvency. It's not like the banks that made bad loans and were really insolvent. Greece can make its interest payments if interest are at a reasonable level. So if there were restoration of confidence, there's absolutely no doubt about Greece being able to make its interest payments.
Well, Greece had high debt levels when you joined the Eurozone.
That's why I mentioned Spain specifically. If Greece were the only problem, you could say this is Greece's problem. But as you said, it's not just Greece. It's Spain, it's the other countries. Spain has a very moderate debt to GDP ratio, and before the crisis, when the economy was functioning normally, they had a surplus. So no one can fault them and say, look, you were reckless. They were doing so much better than the United States. They even had far better bank regulation than the United States. So in many ways, their economic management is superior to what we've had. They made one mistake. They opened their markets up to financial markets.
So what's your sense of whether there was true disclosure about debt levels to the Greek public and whether there was any appetite for truly knowing?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that there was not clear disclosure. And the new government, Papandreou, when he got elected and looked at the books, came to that same conclusion and disclosed it. So he said, I want transparency. You know, I know it's going to cause a problem. But he thought the market would give him credit for transparency rather than punishing him for the mistakes made by the previous administration. You're absolutely right, though, from everything that I've heard, that there was complicity by the financial markets in some of this, what went on. Just like there are, pretty convincing stories going on about speculative attacks, even by some of the advisors to the governments. I mean, there's a lot of rumors going around. What those rumors have made very clear, there's a complete lack of trust in everybody. And that's not good for the market. That's not good for our society. It's not good for democracy.
And the counter to that would be those government ministers were big boys, and they looked for a way to try to get some help, perhaps.
Yes. I mean,
to cover up true debt levels.
But one of the things that we know, our banks were very creative in their accounting systems. They were innovative, not in their ability to really manage risk, not in their ability to allocate capital, which is their real function, but in creative ways of circumventing regulations, standards of accounting, and they were willing to sell that to anybody willing to listen. Now, unfortunately, there were some previous governments that were willing to buy those deceptive practices, but we were marketing those deceptions, and we have to realize that it was American banks that were in the business of marketing deception.